It was supposed to be just another ordinary school day at Ridgewood High, until it wasn't. The sun streamed through the classroom windows, casting golden streaks across the glossy desks. The usual hum of chatter filled the air as students shuffled in, notebooks in hand, already half distracted by their phones. But then, a sharp voice cut through the buzz, silencing the room like a clap of thunder. "Someone stole my bracelet!" Jess's voice rang out, shrill and piercing. Heads turned toward the center of the classroom where Jess stood, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her perfectly styled hair framed her face, which was twisted into a mix of outrage and disbelief. Jess was the queen bee of Ridgewood High, and no one dared to question her. Until today. "It's gone," she repeated, holding out her bare wrist as if expecting the missing bracelet to magically reappear. "Are you sure you didn't just drop it?" someone mumbled from the back. Jess shot a glare so sharp that the boy visibly shrank into his seat. "Do you think I'm stupid? It's not just gone. Someone took it." She scanned the room, her gaze predatory, until her eyes landed on Lila. The quiet, unassuming girl sat near the window, clutching her notebook. Her face turned pale under Jess's piercing glare. "It was you, wasn't it?" Jess declared, her voice dripping with accusation. "You're always sneaking around, looking at things that don't belong to you." Lila's head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? No, I didn't." Jess didn't let her finish. She took a step closer, her voice rising. "Don't act all innocent. My bracelet is custom made, silver with Swarovski crystals. It's worth more than your entire wardrobe, and you couldn't resist, could you?" A gasp rippled through the classroom as Jess's clique nodded in agreement, whispering among themselves. They all knew the bracelet. Jess had flaunted it just that morning in the cafeteria, claiming it was a sweet 16 gift from her parents. It sparkled on her wrist, catching the light, a symbol of her privilege and status. "I didn't take anything." Lila's voice trembled, but her words barely carried over the growing whispers. Someone in the back snickered. "Yeah, her mom's the janitor, right? Probably taught her how to take stuff." The room erupted into soft, cruel laughter, and Lila felt her face flush with humiliation. She opened her mouth to protest again, but the words caught in her throat. What was the point? No one would believe her. "Jess," a calm voice interrupted. It was Daniel, sitting in the corner. His tone was measured, but his eyes were sharp. "You don't have any proof." Jess turned on him, her expression incredulous. "Excuse me? Are you seriously defending her?" "I'm just saying." Daniel replied evenly. "Huh. You don't know for sure. Maybe you just misplaced it." Jess's lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, please. I don't lose things, Daniel. Unlike some people, I actually know how to keep track of my stuff." She gestured toward Lila with a dismissive wave of her hand. Lila stared down at her notebook, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the desk. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Keep your head down, stay quiet, and don't cause trouble." But this wasn't fair. She hadn't done anything wrong. Jess leaned closer, her voice dropping to a taunting whisper. "Just admit it, Lila. Everyone knows it was you." The bell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Students grabbed their bags and filed out, but not before casting lingering glances at Lila. Some looked curious, others amused, and a few even pitying. None of them spoke to her. Lila stayed frozen in her seat, staring at the desk, her mind spinning. The humiliation was suffocating. She hadn't taken anything. She knew she hadn't. But how could she prove it when no one would listen? As the classroom emptied, Daniel paused at the door. He glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might say something, but then he turned and walked away. Lila was alone, and the whispers that followed her out into the hallway felt louder than ever. Ridgewood High wasn't like other schools. Nestled in an affluent suburb, it was where children of the rich and powerful came to learn, socialize, and showcase their privilege. The parking lot gleamed with luxury cars driven by students barely old enough to vote. Designer bags swung from shoulders as polished shoes clicked against marble floors. Ridgewood wasn't just a school, it was a stage where wealth and status took center stage. Lila had always felt out of place here. She walked the halls quietly, her secondhand sneakers scuffing the pristine floors. She didn't carry a designer bag, Instead, she clutched a simple canvas tote, its edges fraying. While her classmates chatted about weekend shopping sprees or family vacations abroad, Lila stayed silent, keeping her head down. She wasn't ashamed of who she was, but she knew better than to draw attention to herself. Her mother, Maria, worked as a janitor at Ridgewood High. Every morning before dawn, Maria would don her uniform, grab her cleaning supplies, and head to the school. Lila often passed her in the hallways, pretending not to notice as her mother mopped or emptied trash cans. It wasn't that she was embarrassed, it was just easier that way. "Keep your head down," her mother always said. "Let them have their world, and we'll have ours." And so Lila had mastered the art of invisibility. She didn't speak up in class unless called upon, didn't sit too close to anyone during lunch, and avoided the cafeteria whenever possible. Her sanctuary was the library, a quiet corner where she could lose herself in books and forget, if only for a while, that she didn't belong. Jess, on the other hand, ruled Ridgewood High like it was her personal kingdom. She was the type of girl who turned heads the moment she walked into a room. Her golden hair fell in perfect waves, and her smile was dazzling when she chose to use it. Jess wasn't just popular, she was untouchable. Her father, a high-profile lawyer, and her mother, a luxury real estate agent, ensured Jess always had the best of everything. From the latest iPhone to her custom-made wardrobe, Jess didn't just live in privilege, she flaunted it. She loved the attention. "Did you see Jess's bracelet?" one girl whispered in the cafeteria, her voice filled with awe. "It's stunning. Her dad gave it to her for her sweet 16. Must have cost a fortune." "Of course," another replied, rolling her eyes. Everything about Jess screams expensive. Jess soaked in the admiration like sunlight. That morning, she had made a point of showing off the bracelet to everyone who cared to look, and even those who didn't. It was a delicate silver band set with sparkling Swarovski crystals. Not too flashy, but elegant enough to command envy. "This bracelet," Jess had declared, holding out her wrist, "is one of a kind. Dad had it custom made for me. I mean, it's not like you can just pick something like this off a shelf." She loved the way people's eyes widened, the way their compliments poured in. "Must be nice," one boy muttered under his breath, earning a sharp glare from Jess. She didn't tolerate jealousy, unless it was directed at her in admiration. Daniel, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines. He wasn't rich like Jess, but he wasn't struggling like Lila either. His family sat somewhere comfortably in the middle. His father was a journalist, his mother a nurse, and their modest home was just outside the wealthiest neighborhoods. Daniel had learned early on to keep his head low and avoid drama. Ridgewood High had a way of chewing up people who tried to stand out. But he had always noticed Lila. There was something about the way she moved, quiet and deliberate, that intrigued him. She didn't fight for attention like Jess, nor did she shrink entirely into the background. She simply existed, steady and unassuming, like a shadow cast by the chaos around her. He saw how the other students looked at her, how they dismissed her, ignored her, or worse, whispered about her behind her back. But Lila never let it show. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that Daniel admired, even if he never said so out loud. The two worlds, Jess's and Lila's, rarely intersected, except in passing. Jess barely noticed Lila, and Lila preferred it that way. But Ridgewood High was small, and no one could stay invisible forever. That morning, as Lila sat alone in the library, she couldn't help overhearing the buzz about Jess's bracelet. "Do you think she actually wears it all the time?" a girl asked her friend. "Why wouldn't she? If I had a bracelet like that, I'd never take it off," the other replied. Lila sighed quietly. She couldn't imagine what it must be like to own something so beautiful, so valuable. The nicest piece of jewelry she had was a simple pendant her mom had given her, a small silver heart on a thin chain. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to her. She fingered the pendant absent-mindedly, letting the soft hum of voices fade into the background. In a few minutes, the bell would ring, and she'd have to face another day of blending into the walls. She didn't know it yet, but by the end of that day, her world would be turned upside down. It happened after lunch. Jess had stormed into the classroom, her face flushed with anger. "My bracelet is gone," she had shouted, silencing the room. For a moment, there was confusion. Then, the accusations began. The sound of Jess's voice echoed through the classroom like a siren. "My bracelet is gone!" she exclaimed, her words slicing through the hum of conversation. The room fell silent as heads turned toward her. Jess stood at the front of the class, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her perfectly polished nails trembling with frustration. Her bare wrist seemed glaringly empty, as though the missing bracelet left a void far greater than its size. "It was right here," Jess continued, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and panic. "I was wearing it this morning. Someone took it." Whispers rippled through the room, a tidal wave of speculation and gossip. "Who would dare steal from Jess?" one girl murmured. "Maybe it fell off," another suggested cautiously, earning a sharp glare from Jess. "I don't lose things," Jess snapped, her tone icy. "Someone stole it and I'm gonna find out who." She scanned the room, her sharp eyes darting from one student to the next. Her gaze landed on Lila, who sat quietly at her desk, scribbling in her notebook. Jess's eyes narrowed. "It was you," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Lila's head shot up, her pen slipping from her fingers. "What? No, I didn't." "Don't even try to deny it," Jess interrupted, taking a step closer. "You were near the gym earlier, weren't you? That's where I noticed it missing. You probably saw it lying there and thought you'd help yourself." "I didn't take anything," Lila said, her voice trembling but firm. Jess ignored her protest. "Everyone knows you need the money. Your mom cleans the school, right? Maybe she taught you how to pocket things that don't belong to you." Gasps rippled through the classroom. A few students glanced nervously at Lila, while others whispered to each other, their eyes wide with intrigue. "Jess, that's enough," Daniel said from his seat in the back corner. His tone was calm but firm, cutting through the rising tension. Jess whirled around to face him, her golden hair swinging. "Are you seriously defending her?" "I'm just saying you don't have any proof," Daniel replied evenly. Jess's face flushed with indignation. "I don't need proof. I know what I saw, and I know people like her." She turned back to Lila, her expression hardening. "Just admit it. We all know you did it." Lila's heart pounded in her chest as every pair of eyes in the room seemed to turn toward her. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in. "I didn't take it," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Jess smirked. "Sure, you didn't." The whispers didn't stop when the bell rang. As students filed out of the classroom, they stole glances at Lila, some curious, others pitying. A few even laughed softly, as though the entire situation was some kind of joke. Lila stayed frozen at her desk, her hands gripping the edges as though she were bracing herself against a tidal wave. "Hey." She looked up to see Daniel standing beside her, his hands shoved into his pockets. His expression was unreadable, but there was a softness in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. Lila swallowed hard. "I didn't take it," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "I don't even know where the gym is." Daniel nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I believe you." Her eyes widened slightly. "You do?" "Jess loves to point fingers," Daniel said with a shrug. "And people love to believe her because she's Jess." Lila managed a faint, shaky smile. "Thanks." Daniel hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "If you want, I can help you figure out what really happened. Someone must have seen something." Lila opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Jess's voice rang out from the hallway. "There she is." Lila's stomach dropped as Jess stormed into the room, flanked by two of her friends. "You know, it's funny," Jess began, her tone mocking. "The bracelet disappears, and suddenly you're all buddy-buddy with Daniel. What? Are you trying to get him to cover for you?" Daniel stepped between them, his jaw tightening. "Back off, Jess. She didn't do anything." Jess let out a laugh, cold and sharp. "Oh, please, don't act like you know her. No one does." She glanced over at Lila, her eyes gleaming with malice. "And no one ever will." The rest of the day was a blur of whispers and stares. Everywhere Lila went, she felt the weight of the rumors pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. By the time she reached the library, her sanctuary, she was ready to collapse. She sank into a chair in the far corner, clutching her bag tightly as though it could shield her from the world. "I didn't take it," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "I didn't take it." But the words felt hollow, even to her. Meanwhile, Jess reveled in the attention. "She's so guilty," she said to her friends as they lounged by the lockers. "I mean, come on, look at her. She probably thought she could sell it for rent money or something." One of her friends, Chloe, hesitated. "But what if she didn't take it? What if it's somewhere else?" Jess scoffed. "Oh, please. I know what I saw. She was near the gym right before it went missing. That's not a coincidence." "But enough," Jess snapped, cutting her off. "Lila did it, and that's the end of it. Now let's make sure everyone else knows." She pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, her fingers flying across the screen. Within minutes, the rumor had spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, Lila's name was on everyone's lips. "She stole Jess's bracelet," one student whispered. "I heard she's been doing it for years." Another added, "Isn't her mom the janitor?" "Makes sense." The comments stung like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. As the day wore on, Lila felt the walls of Ridgewood High closing in on her. The stares, the whispers, the accusations, it was all too much. When the final bell rang, she bolted out of the classroom, desperate for air. She found herself in the courtyard, sitting on a bench beneath a towering oak tree. The cool breeze brushed against her cheeks, carrying with it the faint scent of freshly cut grass. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise, the chaos, the pain, but no matter how hard she tried, Jess's words echoed in her mind. "No one knows you, and no one ever will." For the first time in her life, Lila felt truly invisible. Lila sat hunched over at a corner table in the library, her hands trembling as she tried to focus on her homework. The words on the page blurred together, meaningless lines of text that refused to stick in her mind. How could she concentrate? Everywhere she went, the whispers followed her. She stole it. "Did you hear? It's always the quiet ones." "Her mom's a janitor. What do you expect?" The words crawled under her skin, stinging like nettles. Even the teachers, who were supposed to be impartial, seemed to look at her differently now. Their smiles were tighter, their gazes lingering just a second too long, as if they, too, were wondering if the rumors were true. Her world was crumbling, and she didn't even know how to stop it. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke her thoughts. Lila flinched and looked up to see Daniel sitting across from her, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder. He placed it on the table and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wood. "I don't think you did it," he said softly, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. Lila blinked, startled. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she couldn't find her voice. "How can you be so sure?" she finally managed to whisper, her eyes brimming with tears. Daniel shrugged, a small knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Because I know Jess, and I know she'd rather blame someone else than admit she messed up." Lila's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt, but found none. "Why are you helping me?" she asked after a pause, her voice shaky. Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "Because what Jess is doing isn't right. Someone needs to stand up to her." Lila looked down at her hands, her fingers curling into fists. "I didn't take it," she whispered again, more to herself than to him. "I know," Daniel said simply, "and we're going to prove it." By the next morning, the whispers had turned into a full-blown storm. Jess's accusation had spread far beyond their classroom, reaching every corner of Ridgewood High. It was as if the entire school had decided to turn against Lila overnight. "She's so guilty," someone said as Lila walked down the hallway. "I mean, look at her," another chimed in. "She's obviously desperate. Her mom probably couldn't even afford to buy her lunch, let alone jewelry." Lila clenched her fists and kept walking, her head down. She could feel their eyes on her, like daggers pressing into her back. At lunch, she sat alone at the farthest corner of the cafeteria, picking at her sandwich without appetite. The noise around her felt deafening, the laughter, the chatter, the occasional burst of mocking laughter directed her way. She wished she could disappear, melt into the walls, and never have to face these people again. Across the room, Jess sat surrounded by her clique, basking in their attention. "She's just pathetic," Jess said loudly, making sure her voice carried. "I mean, she can't even deny it properly. That's how you know she did it." Her friends laughed on cue. their voices ringing out like nails on a chalkboard. But Lila wasn't alone for long. Daniel found her sitting under the oak tree after school, her knees pulled up to her chest. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she asked without looking up. Daniel sat down beside her, his backpack thumping softly against the grass. "Not until we prove them wrong." Lila let out a hollow laugh. "And how are we supposed to do that? Jess has already convinced everyone. Even the teachers are looking at me like I'm a criminal." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then said, "I noticed something yesterday. When Jess was in the gym showing off her bracelet, she was fiddling with it. I think she might have dropped it." Lila's head shot up, her eyes wide. "You think it's still there?" "It's worth checking out," Daniel said, standing up and brushing off his jeans. "Come on." The gym was empty by the time they arrived, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the high windows. Daniel led the way to the edge of the bleachers, scanning the ground carefully. "She was standing around here," he said, pointing to a spot near the corner. Lila crouched down, running her hands over the polished wooden floor. Her heart pounded in her chest as she searched, hoping against hope that they would find something, anything, that could clear her name. And then Daniel froze. "Lila," he said, his voice sharp with excitement. She turned to see him holding something small and shiny in his hand, a bracelet. "It's hers," Daniel said, holding it up to the light. "This is the one, right?" Lila nodded slowly, her breath catching in her throat. "How did it?" "She must have dropped it and didn't notice," Daniel said, slipping the bracelet into his pocket. "We need to show this to someone." Lila hesitated, biting her lip. "But what if she says I took it from here? No one's going to believe me." Daniel's expression hardened. "Then we'll find proof. There are security cameras outside the gym. If we can get the footage, we can show everyone the truth." The next day, armed with the bracelet and a copy of the footage from the school's security cameras, Lila and Daniel prepared to face Jess. Lila's heart raced as she walked into the classroom, clutching the bracelet tightly in her hand. The whispers were louder than ever, but this time they didn't sting as much. She had the truth, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Daniel and Lila huddled together in the quiet corner of the library, a sense of urgency hanging in the air. The weight of the accusations and the storm of whispers seemed lighter now that they had a clue, a thread to pull in this tangled mess. "You're sure you saw her drop it?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed. "I didn't think much of it at the time. She was showing off the bracelet to her friends, twisting it around her wrist, and then it just slipped off. It fell into the grass near the field." Lila bit her lip. "But if it was on the field, how did it get lost? Someone must have picked it up." "Maybe," Daniel said, "or maybe it's still there. Either way, we need proof, and the security cameras might have caught something." The gymnasium was empty when they arrived, the faint smell of sweat and rubber lingering in the air. The bleachers stood silent, their metal frames glinting in the late afternoon sun that filtered through the high windows. Daniel led the way to the edge of the field, his steps purposeful. "It was right around here," he said, gesturing to a patch of grass near the bleachers. Lila dropped to her knees, running her hands carefully over the ground. The grass was short but uneven, and her fingers brushed against dirt and small rocks. "Here!" she exclaimed suddenly, holding up a small glittering object. Daniel turned quickly, his eyes widening as he saw the bracelet in her hand. It sparkled even in the fading light, its silver band catching the sun's rays. "This is it," Daniel said, taking it gently from her. "It's Jess's bracelet. She must have dropped it while showing it off." Lila stared at the bracelet, her heart pounding. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a gnawing doubt. Even if we have this, Jess is just going to say I stole it. She'll twist it around and everyone will believe her. Daniel frowned, thinking for a moment. Then his face lit up. "The cameras. There are security cameras near the gym entrance. They might have caught her dropping it." The next challenge was convincing the school's security officer to show them the footage. "Look, Mr. Grayson," Daniel began, his tone measured but urgent. "We just need to see the cameras from the gym area yesterday afternoon. It's really important." "Mr. Grayson, A burly man with a salt and pepper beard raised an eyebrow. You know I'm not supposed to let students access the footage without permission. It's about proving someone's innocence, Lila added softly. Her voice trembled, but her words carried conviction. I didn't steal Jess's bracelet. We think the cameras might show what really happened. Grayson sighed, leaning back in his chair. All right, but just this once. And if anyone asks, you didn't see it from me. He turned to his monitor and pulled up the footage from the previous day. The grainy video feed showed students walking in and out of the gym, laughing and chatting. There, Daniel said, pointing to the screen. They watched as Jess appeared in the frame, her signature golden hair tied back in a sleek ponytail. She was surrounded by her friends, laughing loudly, her bracelet glinting in the sunlight as she gestured animatedly. And then it happened. Jess twirled the bracelet around her wrist absent-mindedly. It slipped off, falling into the grass just as Daniel had described. Jess didn't even glance down as she walked away, too engrossed in her conversation. Lila held her breath, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. That's it, she whispered. That's proof. Grayson nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Looks like you've got your evidence. He burned the clip onto a USB drive and handed it to Daniel. Good luck, kid, he said with a wink. The next morning, Lila and Daniel stood outside the classroom, the USB drive clutched tightly in Daniel's hand. Lila's heart was racing, a mix of fear and determination coursing through her veins. Are you ready for this? Daniel asked, his voice calm and steady. Lila took a deep breath, nodding. Let's do it. When they entered the classroom, the usual chatter filled the air. Jess was at her desk, her friends gathered around her, hanging on her every word. The moment she saw Lila and Daniel, her expression darkened. What are you doing here? Jess sneered. Come to confess? Lila didn't answer. She walked to the front of the room, her hands trembling but her chin held high. Everyone, listen up, Daniel said, his voice cutting through the noise. We've got something to show you. He plugged the USB drive into the teacher's computer, and the screen at the front of the room flickered to life. The room fell silent as the footage played. There was Jess, laughing and showing off her bracelet, and there it was, falling into the grass, unnoticed by everyone except the security camera. Jess's face turned pale. You can't, she stammered, but Daniel cut her off. It's right there, he said, his voice firm. You dropped it, Jess. Lila didn't steal anything. You lied. The classroom erupted into murmurs. Jess lied? She blamed Lila for nothing? What a joke. Jess's friends shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. You didn't even look for it. You just decided to blame me because it was easier than admitting you made a mistake. But I won't let you destroy my reputation for your convenience. Jess opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. By the time the bell rang, the truth had spread across Ridgewood High like wildfire. Jess's power over the school crumbled as her lie was exposed. Her friends distanced themselves, her confidence shaken. As for Lila, she walked through the halls with her head held high, a quiet strength radiating from her. She wasn't invisible anymore, not because of the rumors, but because she had proven that the truth was stronger than any lie. The next morning, the tension in the classroom was palpable. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. The usual hum of conversation was subdued, replaced by hushed whispers and sideways glances. Everyone was waiting to see what Lila and Daniel had planned. At the center of it all, Jess lounged in her chair like a queen on her throne. She leaned back casually, a smug smile playing on her lips. As far as she was concerned, this was her kingdom, and she held all the power. But that was about to change. Lila stood at the front of the room with Daniel by her side. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure the entire class could hear it. But she stood tall, her hands trembling only slightly as she clenched them into fists. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. Jess, do you want to explain this? He held up his phone, the screen glowing as the video began to play. Jess's smile faltered. What are you talking about? She snapped, sitting up straighter. Just watch, Daniel said, turning the phone so the entire class could see. The room fell silent as the video played. There was Jess, standing near the gym, surrounded by her friends. She laughed, twisting the bracelet around her wrist, the sunlight catching on the crystals. And then, as clear as day, the bracelet slipped off and fell into the grass. Jess didn't even notice as she walked away, too busy chatting to care. The silence that followed was deafening. Jess's confident expression crumbled, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. I must have dropped it, she stammered, her voice unsteady. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You must have dropped it? That's all you have to say? Jess's embarrassment quickly turned to defensiveness. Her voice rose as she pointed at Lila. How was I supposed to know? It doesn't change the fact that she's... Enough! Lila's voice rang out, sharp and clear. It was the loudest she had ever spoken, and it stopped Jess mid-sentence. Even Lila seemed surprised by the strength of her own voice, but she didn't falter. She took a step forward, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. You blamed me, Lila said, her voice trembling with emotion. You humiliated me in front of everyone because it was easier than admitting you made a mistake. You let people call me a thief, you let them whisper behind my back, and you didn't care. All because you couldn't be bothered to look for your own bracelet. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Jess opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her cheeks burned red, and she looked down at her desk, avoiding the gazes of her classmates. Lila took a deep breath, her voice steady now. I didn't do anything to you, Jess, but you decided I was an easy target. Well, I'm not going to let you or anyone else treat me like this anymore. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The class erupted into murmurs. Jess lied? She let everyone think Lila stole it? That's so messed up. Jess's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, sliding their chairs away from her as if to distance themselves from the fallout. Even Chloe, her most loyal follower, avoided her gaze. Jess, that was so wrong, Chloe muttered under her breath. Jess's head snapped up. Chloe, you're supposed to be on my side. But Chloe just shook her head. I didn't sign up for this. The teacher entered the room moments later, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She glanced around at the tense faces and the USB drive Daniel now held in his hand. What's going on? She asked, her voice cautious. Daniel stepped forward, handing her the drive. We found the video that proves Lila didn't steal Jess's bracelet. It's all here. The teacher nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned to Jess, her expression stern. Jess, I think we need to have a conversation with the principal after class. Jess slumped in her chair, her bravado completely shattered. By the end of the day, the truth had spread like wildfire. Jess's reputation as Ridgewood High's queen bee crumbled under the weight of her lies. Students who once followed her every word now avoided her, whispering about her in the hallways. She's such a liar. I can't believe we all believed her. Poor Lila. As for Lila, she walked through the halls with her head held high for the first time. She wasn't invisible anymore, not because of the rumors, but because she had proven her strength. Daniel caught up to her near the library, his usual quiet smile playing on his lips. You were amazing in there, he said. Lila blushed, ducking her head. I couldn't let her win. And you didn't, Daniel said firmly. For the first time in weeks, Lila felt a spark of hope. She wasn't just the janitor's daughter or the quiet girl in the corner. She was someone who had stood up for herself, someone who had fought back and won, and that was a feeling no one could take away from her. By the end of the day, the atmosphere at Ridgewood High was different, like a storm had passed, leaving the air clearer but tinged with an unmistakable tension. The truth about Jess had spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the school. The queen bee's reign had been brought to its knees, not by a rival of equal power, but by someone she never thought could stand up to her. Jess's friends began distancing themselves almost immediately. Chloe, her most loyal follower, now avoided her in the hallways, her guilt too heavy to face. The other girls, who once clung to Jess's every word, now found excuses to sit elsewhere during lunch or pair with someone else for group projects. Can you believe she blamed Lila like that? One whispered as they passed Jess in the corridor. I mean, she didn't even apologize, another replied. That's just gross. The sting of whispers was something Jess wasn't used to. For the first time, The girl who had wielded rumors like weapons found herself at their mercy. She spent her lunches alone, hunched over her tray at the far end of the cafeteria. Her confidence, once unshakable, was now fragile. And though she tried to hold her head high, her arrogance still lingered, like a fading ember refusing to die. But Jess's fall from grace wasn't what mattered most to Lila. For Lila, everything had changed. The same halls that had once felt like a battlefield now felt lighter. Students who had once avoided eye contact now nodded at her in acknowledgement. A few even murmured apologies as they passed her in the halls. "I'm sorry for believing Jess," one girl said quietly, her cheeks flushing red. Lila accepted the apologies with a polite nod. But she didn't dwell on them. The wounds Jess had inflicted were deep, and forgiveness wasn't something that could be given overnight. Even some of the teachers made an effort to make amends. "Lila," her homeroom teacher said after class, her tone gentle, "I'm sorry if I treated you unfairly these past few days. We should have given you the benefit of the doubt." "Thank you," Lila replied softly, though she still felt a pang of bitterness. But for the first time in weeks, Lila felt something she hadn't in a long time: freedom. She walked through the halls of Ridgewood High with her head held high, her shoulders square. The rumors, the whispers, the accusing glances, none of it had the same weight anymore. She had stood up for herself. She had fought back, and she had won. What would you do if you were in Lila's shoes? Have you ever faced a situation where someone unfairly blamed you for something you didn't do? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Let's talk about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. And remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest strength. Don't be afraid to let yours be heard.